Okay, we're on. Mike, do you want me to lead this, or do you want to lead through the agenda?
Go ahead, Les. Thank you.
Okay. So with regards to call to order, I'll just identify that all 4 ad hoc committee members are present. We did not receive any public communication prior to the meeting. I just checked here shortly, just prior with our city clerk, and no public communications have come in advance to this afternoon's meeting. With regards to presentation, we have the one item for you, a consideration of the sites inventory list to be included in the city's housing element update. And I'm going to share my screen here. Hope you all can see that okay. So we are back together with you for our second meeting, and just as a quick for matter of background, with our first meeting conducted about 3 weeks ago, at that time we provided you an overview of the potential sites identified. The committee members discussed those. There was the introduction of one additional site brought forward with regard to the Hellman Ranch oil production site. This committee in general provided a consensus on the initial list, sites list that was submitted to you, and staff subsequently moved forward with further review and follow up on all of the potential sites identified to you. So we're coming back to you this afternoon to be able to show you the results of those potential sites, which we'll be going through here momentarily, and to then garner final review comments from the committee in any direction that you would like to provide to us. And then we will be taking that information after this afternoon's meeting and moving forward with the preparation of the draft housing element that will be then at a later date brought forward for the Planning Commission and City Council to review and provide comment prior to that being sent off to the state for their review. So we're going to go through each of those sites with you, and then we'll provide an opportunity to discuss those as we venture forward here. The first one on the list is the Shops at Rossmoor site. We've I guess, if you will, kind of sharpened this a little bit further. We've identified up to 10 acres within that 27-acre overall site that's identified in yellow. Again, please note that that the Shops at Rossmoor property does not include the property north of Rossmoor Way. It's all under one ownership, the same ownership. I'd like to let you know that we have spoken with the ownership, and they have identified to us that they do not object to their property being included in the housing element, with the understanding that there is no definitive obligation or requirement on their part to have to build residential going forward. We've identified again the current zoning, and we would propose a future yet to be determined mixed use zoning designation or overlay for this property. And there is the unit potential of up to a maximum of 400 units if the density of 40 dwelling units per acre is identified. And again, that density is generally consistent with the 3 existing residential multifamily projects immediately to the west of the Shops at Rossmoor site. I'll take a second to pause. Is there any questions or comments specific to the Shops at Rossmoor? Okay, we'll move on to the next site. Right across the street to the east, the Old Ranch Town Center site.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Okay, I'm assuming and looking at the Shops at Rossmoor that you want to go back to that what you're really looking at is the area in the northwest, the open parking lot.
Well, Patty, we're identifying the entire property as the potential.
Oh,
But
Okay.
yes, there's the likelihood of this area, but that's not for certain. So there are leases secured on all of the larger tenant spaces in these two areas. It wouldn't preclude something at a future date where there could be some reconstruction or redevelopment of these areas as well.
You have to keep in mind that the city's sales tax is sacred.
Well,
We can we can in no way impinge on that.
and our position on it is that the first, which again, the mixed use zoning that needs to be established would speak to this, but our intent is within these areas of established retail that if there was reconstruction or redevelopment, that you would see a good portion, if not all of that existing retail footprint retained going forward. So it would be something that would be built above first floor retail. But again, those specifics still have to be worked out, and we're definitely looking at it with the mindset of from an economic development perspective, and that we do need to be very careful and cognizant of the revenue generation that comes off of all of our commercial properties in the community.
One of the things that hit the city very hard was back in, I guess it was about 1975, they had ERAF, which was a program by the state where they took more of your property taxes. And that hit Seal Beach really hard because we didn't have at that time any significant retail, none at all. So that's when the city ended up going to a utility tax to make up the difference. And now, much as the residents initially didn't want it, we have two financially valuable shopping centers, Shops at Rossmoor and across the street, Old Ranch. Those provide desperately needed property sales tax revenue. Without that, our city's in a hole.
Very much understood. The Old Ranch Town Center site is about the same amount of acreage. It's identified as 26 acres. A much smaller amount of area is identified here. Half of that was shown for Shops at Rossmoor at 5 acres. And again, proposing it would be a mixed use type environment on about less than 25% of the site. There are multiple owners that can make it a little bit more complicated and difficult as most of these properties have different owners. And similar to across the street at Shops at Rossmoor, we would be proposing a mixed use zoning or overlay being established here. And the identification is a unit potential of up to 200 units at a density in alignment with which was identified across the street at 40 units to the acre. Any comments or questions regarding this site?
I have concerns about the southeast portion of that site because that's pretty close to the runway.
Yes, and we don't know for sure where redevelopment would occur. The thought is it would likely be more in alignment with Seal Beach Way along the frontage, with a few of these properties maybe being consolidated with first floor retail services and units above. There is this parking lot for Target is very large and underutilized. There may be a potential for some units in that general area. As you get further to the south, it is a little more complicated, except along Seal Beach Boulevard, and obviously, though it's not within the airport, specifically within the boundaries, the CNL boundaries, we definitely would be obviously aware of that and wanting to take a very close look at that should that be proposed in the future. The next area is Old Ranch Country Club. This is a little bit different than what we showed you last time, only because last time it was quite nondescript. We're trying to be a little more definitive here based on, again, very preliminary conversations with the representative of the property owner. They have identified to us potentially of some residential units being established within these two yellow areas. These are not individual lots. These are just defined areas generally representing what was discussed with us previously. We've identified a maximum unit count of 120 units, though I don't know what that unit count would be for sure, because it's been very speculative and preliminary at this point. But I don't anticipate, based on those preliminary conversations, it would be any more than that. In fact, it would probably be a little bit less than the 120 units that we've identified here. As it was conversed during our last meeting with regards to proximity to the airport, we have spoken with the Airport Land Use Commission and reviewed the maps. It is outside the 65 CADL zone. Also, the path of travel or flight path tends to direct flights, if you can see on my cursor here, through this general area is the standard route for the runway. They tend to, depending if they're landing or taking off with the wind direction, but what we have found is that they're directed to make that turn, and then if they're ascending, to make the turn over the golf course in this area and then over the Navy base. And also, as you all know, in proximity to these two locations, we have the Airs Inn and Senior Living, Airs Inn here, and the Senior Living complexes in these locations in proximity to that. So any
I'm gonna make one comment. There is a development agreement on that property to keep it residential, keep it recreation for another 9 to 10 years. Now, I know Les said, oh, we can change that. No, Les, we fought very hard for that agreement. We don't want it changed. Okay.
And just to confirm what I mentioned last meeting is that development agreements, if it is the consensus of the city council, they can be amended. Not endorsing that. It's a neutral statement being made by staff, by me. But it is something that obviously, should there be a development proposal come forward that have to be addressed. We also need to confirm further if these sites are remain, as this goes through the review with HCD. That's another matter too that we would have to discuss with them as to if they would be able to remain, knowing that there's a development agreement in place at this time that does not allow for residential use.
Well, I don't think their position is conducive to having housing on them anyway, because if you pull back and look at a big map, it is at the end of the runway, and most of the traffic pattern, I believe, is pertaining to helicopters right now. It is a joint use training base, and we do get groups in there training for a week or two at a time. And even though they are told the suggested routes out, they don't always follow the routes out. And depending on the planes, if it's a fighter jet or a C-5 or something, they're not following the same route as the helicopters. So even though it wouldn't be enough to maybe, change a CNL or something like that, but it is still traffic out the runway over that area. So I don't think it's appropriate for housing.
Oh. I've been on the bridge when a C-5 took off. And I'm going to tell you something. Everything stopped on the bridge. Everybody was stunned. A C-5 can't make a turn like that, especially if it's loaded. And it went over the bridge, not over the wide open area where the public range is. No, it went over the bridge and then over Leisure World. That's the only way an aircraft like that can take off, because they're so huge. And that base is now the disaster support area for all of Southern California. So, much as you're screaming housing, God forbid we have a major earthquake, which one day will happen. Everybody will be wondering how we weren't prepared, or the base was choked. So, I know it's one of those things that's going to be like the state fighting the Coastal Commission on some areas in Old Town. They're going to have to duke it out.
Okay, we can all, we can collectively talk about all the sites too at the end, which we are anticipating occurring. I'll move on to the next site. This was we identified this to you last meeting, the Leisure World location and the potential of up to 10 acres within Leisure World. We identified the 5 mutuals that are on the perimeter of Leisure World being possibly available for redevelopment to where you could, some of the units that are single story units that with a number of them being many years old, being redeveloped with multi-story projects, residential units similar to what exists near the main entrance on Seal Beach Way. We've identified that at a 30 unit per acre density, that could lead up to 300 additional units. I do have to let the ad hoc committee know that this is one item that we have not reached out and talked to the general manager yet for the Golden Rain Foundation. We wanted to talk further with the committee about this, and if the committee, again, if this site remains on the list, that will be a next step, is to talk with the general manager about this further. But we've maintained this. We still believe that though there are some challenges with it, it is a potential. We also talked with staff at HCD about this to get their preliminary feedback. They did not, they were not opposed to it, but they were questioning as to how logistically that would work and what incentives would be brought forward in order to navigate, that mechanism to relocate residents and be able to make that happen. So they didn't say no to it, but they would be looking at it very closely if this is included, and just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. Any comments or thoughts regarding the Leisure World location?
Yes, would that housing be restricted to senior citizens?
Yeah, we are not proposing anything different than the current, current age restrictions that are in existence at Leisure World today.
Well, if it's inside Leisure World's borders, they have that's their rules.
Correct. Yeah, we're not proposing any change to that at all, Patty. That's their prerogative.
I have a question on how it worked.
So those that reside in mutuals, they don't actually own the unit. The thought would be that you would have to, they would have to go, and Rain Foundation would have to obviously find a way to facilitate that to where a building or buildings would be, you'd have to vacate that unit or those units and reconstruct them, and then allow for occupancy back into those units, and as well as additional new tenants would fill those new unit spaces. But it would be a bit of a logistics challenge to make that work. But again, there is a turnover with units there, and this is something that we wouldn't anticipate happening all at once, but probably over an extended period of time, that there would be the reconstruction of either segments or units, or I'm sorry, buildings or segments of the mutual being done at one time.
Do the mutuals have the power to tell people you have to vacate because we're going to tear this down and build 2 stories?
Our preliminary understanding is that they yes, but again, we need to explore that further with the general manager. But our understanding is that they do have that they do have that ability, that authority.
I would just think it would make Leisure World more affordable. So I don't see how that's, if they did add units, which is always the goal of Leisure World.
Yeah. Our other thought is the age of the units. So these are aging units, so they are maintained quite well. They are older units, and we also saw another benefit, especially in mutuals 9, 11, and 16, that depending on where they're built and with some height, they could provide some noise attenuation from the 405-22 corridor.
Les, I don't quite understand. I mean, Leisure World is complicated for me, but they're not exactly the same as renters though, because you can put improvements into your own unit. You can improve your kitchen, you can put appliances or whatever. So I just didn't know how that works. If they tell you to get out and we'll put you in another unit or something, it just, I wasn't sure how easy that it would be or how uncomplicated that would be.
Yeah, and we know some about it, but we need to explore that further as well. Our understanding is again that it's not a condominium ownership where you have an actual unit and you have
A share.
a
Yeah.
stake in that particular piece, if you will, of the common area. That it's not rental, but it's somewhere between a condominium ownership and rental, I guess, is how I would describe it. But we do need to talk with with Randy and his staff further about this, if in fact this remains on the list.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, in theory, they could take every one of those one-story units that you're looking at and double deck them. Take them down and make them 2 or 3 stories. 2 stories at least. That would double the size of Leisure World, but I'm just saying, in theory, you could do that because those buildings are now all like 60, 70 years old.
Yes, that's correct. In theory, we're identifying 300 units, which again is far less than what the number of units would be if you did that for the mutuals identified here. But yeah, that was our initial thought, was that this infill potential could be advantageous to to Leisure World and the mutuals in the long run. Over the next 8 years, as again these units are older. Again, it's more of a logistics matter and how they could make that happen, but we certainly see potential for it. I'll go ahead and move on to the next site. This is the Seal Beach Plaza, the small shopping center. They're just adjacent to Leisure World. There are multiple ownerships, though. The majority of the ownership is under one party. So this parcel here and this parcel are all the same ownership, with the Chase Bank, Carl's Jr., and the 2-story building on Westminster being separate ownership. But we've identified about 2.5 acres of the 8-acre site with the potential for mixed use. Again, we would anticipate that if there were mixed use, it would be in a vertical assignment where the first floor would again maintain its retail and units being built above it. And we're proposing a mixed use designation, and we're identifying a maximum of 75 units within that footprint. The next location is the Boeing property. We've changed this out a little bit only because we had a conversation with Boeing staff. They have not said yes or no. It was a very constructive conversation with them, but we decided based on that conversation that the entire campus should be shown, or not. It's not the entire. There's still some additional ownership over in this area, but the main campus here, which is about 40 acres in size, we've identified up to 6 acres at a density of 40 units to the acre, so about 240 units. As to where that would be on the property, it would likely be within one or more of the parking areas we originally talked and presented to you. The area here in the northwest corner. In conversing with Boeing staff, we talked about the other corner as well as the parking lot off of Adolfo Lopez as well. So we're waiting to hear back from them. Again, it was a positive exchange, and they wanted to look at this a little bit further, but they were not necessarily opposed based on that initial dialogue and engagement with them.
How
let's,
many,
go ahead, Mike.
how many stories would that be?
Well, it all depends on, we identified it to 6 acres, which 240 units on 6 acres would probably be a 3-story. I don't know if we'd want to, we could entertain, a taller structure than that. Possibly. It's not uncommon to see 4- and 5-story residential units in here in Orange County. And obviously there are buildings around it that are multi-story, not only the main office campus, but other buildings that are an equivalent in height to a multi-story building. So we're estimating, in all likelihood, Mike, a 3-story, possibly 4 with depending on the parking arrangement and how that gets set up, but somewhere in the 3, maybe 4-story range.
Don't we have a 2-story limit in Seal Beach?
No, that we do not have a 2-story limit throughout the community. There are areas of the city, our single family or RHD 20 is a 2-story limit, but there are other areas in this community that you are allowed to exceed the 2-story provision. And in fact, an example of that is the multifamily development there adjacent to shops at Rossmoor. Those units are taller than 2-story as a reference point. And again, this would require an amendment to the Boeing specific plan, and the specific plan could represent a height provision within the development standards of the specific plan.
I know that some 3 stories were allowed in this city. For example, there's one building down on Main Street near the pier. That's not 2 stories, that's more. And I know that the condos over Montecito, they're taller than 2 stories. But we have since those buildings were constructed, we have tightened up the height restriction in this city. We do not allow anything higher than 2 stories in Old Town. Pretty much nothing higher than 2 stories in College Park East or West or the Hill.
Correct. The predominantly residential areas that you just mentioned all have that limitation. These particular areas that we're identifying to you this afternoon, we would anticipate, especially here at the Boeing site, a taller structure than 2 stories. It would really take up a substantial footprint to get 240 units in a 2-story environment, when you're also considering the parking, being able to accommodate the parking needs as well. So we would be identifying in locations like this, as well as the other mixed use sites that were identified at shops at Rossmoor and in the old Ranch Shopping Center at being in all likelihood a 3-story environment. This side here I could see going even higher than 3 stories.
Yes, you know what I find frustrating is the state is trying to pack people in, and circulation seems to have gone out the window as far as parking and traffic is concerned. I look at what they've done at Huntington Beach. Now, Huntington, I understand, has to come up with 13,000 units, which I would go crazy. But when you go down to Edinger Avenue, that center down there that to the east of Beach, to the west of Beach Boulevard, they have put in multi-story apartment units. The density from Gothard and between Beach is just unbelievable. And the traffic is horrendous. How are people supposed to live like that? I mean, that's not a question you guys can answer. I'm just lamenting that fact. This is what it's coming to. How do people live like that?
You can thank Sacramento for that. When they built the Ayers Hotel last, they had some concerns about the height restriction with the Navy base next to it. I'm not sure. Do they have a lot of say-so in construction around and near their base? How does that work? Do you know offhand?
They can, if it's a matter of life safety and protection. I mean, I don't know about structure height, but for example, any wireless communication facilities that come into the city have to be screened by by the Navy for any conflict with their operations. But we do have other structures. I mean, for example, there's a hotel just right here. Is that a
The
home?
Hampton Inn.
Hampton Inn. Thank you. I was going to say Homewood.
Yeah, they had some
Which
window issues.
that's I believe 4 stories in height, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but they had some window requirements
Yeah.
where they can't look out the window onto the base and stuff like that. And I don't know if that was after the fact or during, or just just food for thought.
Yeah, and those are matters that obviously we would have to work out with the Navy on any siting and proximity. We would certainly make sure that they would have their opportunity to have a say on appropriately on any development activity in proximity to the base.
Les, I had a question about parking. It seems like a lot of the things that are coming through these days are limiting our ability to require parking. If we built units in the parking lots of this structure, do we still have an ability to require a certain amount of parking, or is that out the window too?
Well, there would be 2 factors. One, obviously, the parking demand for Boeing. That if they took over, like let's say the Adolfo Lopez parking lot here at the South Point, there would be the matter of that loss and how does that relate to their demand. We'd have to assess that and evaluate that, and then secondarily would be the matter of meeting the parking requirements that we have for multifamily and ensuring that they're accommodating that demand. So those are all factors that would have to be considered with all of these sites as we consider them, all of the reuse sites we're identifying. I know in conversing with Boeing, I get the impression that they're not expecting all of the employees to come back post-COVID. That was not specifically identified to us, but I'm anticipating that they're not expecting 100% return of all of the employees at this particular site. So we'll find out more when they report back to us. But yeah, we'd have to address both. We'd have to address their parking needs and the loss of that parking, as well as ensure that the new residential that comes in provides the parking to accommodate those residential activities going forward.
Okay, I had one other question, and that was, I guess it was the last cycle. I can't remember how many years ago. We had to also identify a site for emergency housing. I don't know if it was bridge or just emergency housing, homeless shelter. And I believe it was identified on this property. And at that time they said, well, you couldn't put your housing on the same site that you put your emergency housing. So does that ring a bell with anybody, or has that changed, or does that have any impact on us?
We can definitely look into that, Shelley. I'm not aware of it.
Okay.
Unless John remembers that, we'd have to go back and revisit it. What I was told is that previously that Boeing had told staff during the last cycle that there was not an interest in them wanting to see any of their campus identified for housing going forward.
Okay.
But obviously, we're hoping that that position is different today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next location you're all familiar with is the Accurate storage site. It's about 4.5 acres in size. And this is already identified, so it has not been developed, so we will continue to identify it as such. It's currently zoned residential high density 20, so we've identified 90 units at 20 units per acre for this site. This is the Sunset Aquatic Park off of Edinger. We did talk with the county about this site. So what we found out is the county is leasing this property and all of the aquatic park properties. There are multiple properties that make up this point, if you will, at the end of Edinger. And they did identify to us that the State Lands Commission is the ultimate underlying owner of the property. even though it's identified by county records as being owned by the county, they clarified that with us in our conversation that the underlying owner is actually the State's Lands Commission. We still feel there's value and benefit in keeping this on the list to move it forward. Though it can be quite interesting to see how the Lands Commission views this, especially if HCD supported our position of putting in the inventory. The county was not necessarily opposed to having the site considered as a potential housing site as well. So they, I wouldn't, they weren't, I'll just say they weren't opposed. There wasn't, it wasn't as though they were anxious to see it converted, but they definitely did not express opposition to it being incorporated into our housing element. We've identified a land use designation from a change, from public service to residential high density 33, that we put a 30 unit per acre identification. We think that density is actually similar to, but less in, less than what you're seeing right across the channel in Huntington Beach and Huntington Harbor. But we would envision a similar development pattern on this property.
Les, why wouldn't you expand that footprint to include the parking lot on the northwest and the southwest? Those are two huge parking lots. Just for the exercise alone, why isn't that being considered? Because
we felt that this site, because of its proximity to Huntington Beach and the units across the way, made the most sense. The concern was the property just to the west here of Sunset Way, which is a boat storage area. It does flank not only the base, but that habitat area, sensitive habitat area of the base. There was some concern potentially with that as well. We just felt that this seemed to be the most conducive location that would, again, be adjacent to similar development right across the channel, but still have a buffer between the base and the habitat areas of the ecological preserve area just across the way there. I mean, we could certainly, if we could explore that further if you would like to see that expanded or changed to a different site, but that was our justification for it.
well, I just thought it's an exercise, and it's why not capture more than less, especially when it's not affecting any of our residents per se, like all those other locations are.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just an exercise. And if you have to put a number on it, there you go, put a number on it, But yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from too. So, and there's also that parking lot on the left, south
Correct. Yeah.
west side too. It's pretty big parking lots in general. But I understand your position too. But I just thought if it's just an exercise, the more the merrier over there, in my opinion. But that's up to you.
Is the density across the way you think is a 40 or what's the density is more than RHD 33?
We could, I don't know exactly the density. I do know it's higher. These are all, I believe, 4-story units with a unit on each floor. There's clusters. They're basically, I think, 8 units. So I think there are 32 units, per these clusters in here. So I'm pretty sure it's higher than 30. I don't know if it's as high as 40. We could certainly look at that and calc that out probably fairly quickly and be able to see about maybe that should be RHD, the next level up, and maybe go to a 40 unit per acre density here if it's comparable with across the way.
Would we have visibility issues into the Navy base, or it's just pretty much the habitat area that's down there next to it?
I would say here at this location that it probably isn't as sensitive of a location from the Navy standpoint, but we'd obviously have to look into that as well. But I would think at this site here, it's quite a bit different from the other location by Boeing, where you've got a lot of activity occurring. It's kind of the heart of the base, if you will, with a lot of
Yeah.
activity and operations occurring right across the Seal Beach Way. I don't know for certain, but I would think this would probably be less of a concern to the Navy with regards to visibility.
Okay. Thank you.
The next is the Navy site. As we identified to you previously, the Navy is in the process of soliciting interest for a out parcel lease of up to 22 acres, which is generally defined by the yellow line here. There's actually two lease properties represented within that footprint. We have talked with the Navy since the last meeting. They're neutral from the standpoint of us identifying the potential for residential units on the site. We identified that we were looking at up to 120 units. Their position was that they were okay with us listing that, but that they would, if there was a need for them to have to identify a position of support, that the Navy would not be able to do that. But if it was just a matter of us listing the site, that they were fine with it being listed. Obviously, again, with the caveat that there's no obligation on their part to have to build any residential units. And as we talked about before, with the solicitation that they had previously done, the responses varied with different development concepts. The Navy has not been able to share that with us in any specifics, but it generally did identify that at least one or more of the respondents did identify an interest in building residential units on a portion of this property. So we feel comfortable with being able to represent this as such. We have talked with HCD about this, and they have not identified any objection at this point for us listing it in the inventory.
How many store? Go ahead, Patty.
That Navy property is on the northeast corner of PCH and Seal Beach Boulevard. What about the southeast corner? There's a small area there that someone some years back was trying to put in some storage units, you know, where you rent storage.
The Navy has not identified any interest in wanting to lease out any of the land south of PCH in this area. A lot of that has to do with the blast zone and the proximity of activity to the blast zone. So I think that's probably one of the key factors. But to date, they've only identified this property identified in yellow, or this area identified in yellow, and have not expressed any interest in doing any type of out parcel leasing outside of that footprint.
Okay, because some years ago, I was under the impression that someone bought that little corner and then went over to the Navy and said, okay, this is what I want to do with it. And they were aghast because they didn't know that someone else had bought it. But because it had to do with the PC electric right of way. And I think the gentleman who pursued this was Lansdale, who lived, because it's probably gone out, he was an old guy then, lived on Ocean Avenue, the Gold Coast.
I'm not aware of it, Patty. Again, what the Navy has reported to us is, I don't know what that ownership entails. I would assume that it's under the Navy's ownership. It's all obviously fenced and within the, the confines of the base boundary. But again, to date, they've only identified to us the potential for out parcel leasing the property identified here.
I was curious about it now because, like I said, I was told that someone had purchased that small parcel there, Lansdale. And I don't know whatever happened to it. But I'd kind of look into it.
I know that we'll look into it, but I know that the preliminary review that I did of this area, because I was a bit curious a while back, I'll go back and look at it again, but the preliminary review that I had did not show any of this area having ownership outside of the Navy, but we'll double check on that. And we certainly can reach out to the Navy and talk with them about it as well.
There was electric right of way, and this gentleman bought, I believe, the Pacific Electric right of way as it cuts through the Navy property, and that area to the north of it along PCH. The
Okay.
person who might know, of all people now, is Sean Boyd, because he was friends with this man. And I remember him telling me about their plans. And basically this guy went to the Navy and said, hey, I just bought this. And this is what I'm going to do with it. What do you want to give me for it? Or something like that. And I don't know if they ever bought it back from him or what, because obviously no development was done. I'm just saying that that's what happened.
Understood.
Les, how many stories are identified in this location?
We have not identified stories on this.
And wouldn't that apply, the 25-foot story ordinance affect this area or not?
No, this is under Navy, under the Navy and the military. So really, they how do I say it politely? They trump our development standards.
Hmm.
So we definitely want to work with them. I have no reason to believe that the Navy doesn't want to do something that's right and is conducive and in good relations and understanding McGaw as well as the residential development across Seal Beach Boulevard. But at the end of the day, they can define and dictate that without having to get our approvals.
Then what I remember you saying is that the Navy was looking for uses that would be helpful to their service people. I suppose a small or a maybe some housing development in proximity to the Navy housing or something might be something that they wouldn't mind.
I would think so, Shelley. I mean, they initially identified to us when they brought forward their interest in the out parcel leasing of this land is that their primary objective is supporting Navy personnel, but they would not make it exclusive. That they wanted to make it an inclusive environment that would also be of resource and benefit to the city of Seal Beach and the community at large. So I would anticipate that if residential were incorporated here, that that they would probably want to see it something that's supporting Navy personnel, but maybe it may not be exclusive to that.
Okay.
They've also talked about hospitality and retail on this property as well.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens, but I think all three of those have a potential on this property going forward.
Okay. Thank you.
Are they subject to CEQA, NEPA, and Coastal Commission?
They would definitely have to do NEPA,
NEPA.
and they would work with the Coastal Commission. They're not bound by the Coastal Commission, but as the Navy staff conveyed to us previously, they would want to work with them, coordinate with them, similar to how they would work with us.
Okay.
Okay, move on to our next site, the Seal Beach Center location. We've identified about 4 acres of the 9-acre site for the potential of mixed use, which would generate up to 120 units. And again, this would obviously require reconstruction in order to make that happen. And we would anticipate that a good portion, if not all, of the existing retail square footage would remain going forward. We have had, I think I conveyed this to you last time we met. We have had multiple conversations with Regency Centers, who are it's their properties within their portfolio. They're quite supportive of the opportunity, of the option, if you will, though they very much have let us know that they have long-term established leases with both Pavilions and CBS, so they don't see anything in the foreseeable future on this property for many years, but they see great value and benefit in at least having that option on the table going forward.
One question down at the very bottom, it says 6 units. That would be 60 units, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, that's a typo. My bad. I should say
That's
60.
okay.
My bad. Thank you for pointing that out.
Would there be a height restriction there too?
Well, again, we would have to address that with, we're proposing a mixed use zoning being established, and which is, we don't have the standards and criteria for that, but I think height would need to be addressed, as well as, you know, relationship to the, you know, the adjacent streets too. So
Yeah.
there's several criteria that we have to assess and evaluate as we create the development standards for that mixed use designation. The next area is the Main Street corridor. Basically, it's the Main Street specific land footprint for the most part. And we've just identified the potential of incorporating residential units into that specific plan. Well, there are a handful of units currently within the 3-block corridor. The specific plan currently does not identify residential as a permitted use. So the existing units that are there are legal non-conforming, and we're identifying up to 60 units within that footprint of the Main Street specific plan, with an amendment to the specific plan being necessary. The next site is it's one of the few undeveloped properties, the Dynam Marina site, 4.3 acres in size, and the property is for sale right now. The developer, not developer, excuse me, the people listing the property are aware of the process we're going through, and there appears to be no concern over the property being identified as it is here. They are entertaining a number of proposals that have come in for developing the site. At this point in time, we do not know if that would be single or multifamily. And obviously, there's a number of criteria issues that need to be addressed. Obviously, the remediation of the site, as well as the fact that it's currently zoned oil. I think it's oil exploration or oil. I can't remember what OE stands for right now, since this is the only property that's designated that way. And we've identified, though this is not saying that that is what the ultimate zoning would be, we've identified, for the sake of this exercise, a zoning of RHD 20, oil extraction. Thank you, Barry. RHD 20 is the proposed land use for the site, which would yield around 86 units off the property if the entire site were developed. Okay, I think that was the last site. We as I mentioned earlier, we did identify, or it was identified, excuse me, at the last ad hoc committee meeting. I believe Patty brought up the Hellman Ranch oil production site. I think it's up on the, if I remember right, the northwest segment of the Hellman Ranch footprint there. We researched that and found that at this time, the site can't be considered development for at least 30 years. There is a condition regarding their coastal development permit. And I believe also the site is still considered active for oil production. I believe that 30-year window starts once oil production ceases, or the use for oil production ceases. So right now, at this point in time, it's a property that we couldn't identify because of those restrictions going well beyond, that 8-year planning horizon for our housing element update. So we have not included it as a result of our findings in researching the site. So this is our summary of all of the sites that we just identified to you. What I wanted to point out is that one item that we identified last time that we've reduced is the potential accessory dwelling units. We identified to you last meeting 100 units. We've dropped that down to 50 units. We really don't know how many units we'll be able to account. We want to account for as many as we can of accessory dwelling units. We think these are, like it or not, we're going to see a number of these units built in our community, especially over the next 8 years. But it really is something that HCD will be identifying to us in responding to our draft document when they review it. Also, as we talked about last time, as a reminder this time, under the potential units category, the asterisk marks on a number of those properties represents the fact that we have dropped the potential unit count in half on those units, which is reflected in the next column under likely arena credits, because they're all in a mixed use environment, and they're all currently developed. So historically, HCD has not given 100% value for those environments, and we're estimating it to be at 50%. Please keep in mind it could be less than 50%, could be higher than 50%, and it may be a matter that's determined on a site-by-site basis by HCD. But we've taken, I think, a middle-of-the-road approach here and identified a 50% reduction in the units. So the total units identified for all of the sites and the potential 80 accessory dwelling units comes out to 2,005 units. With the likely reductions that we're anticipating, it puts us at 1,577 units. So we're 334 units above the 1,243 arena allocation units that we need to accommodate. I mentioned this, and I think this is a healthy number for consideration, because we really need to target, or need to, at least in this initial draft, identify a cushion, if you will. And this puts about a 21% cushion in which, Barry's gone through this multiple times, as I have as well, though not as challenging as this one. A 20 to 30% cushion is a healthy cushion to have in preparing a draft document for public review, and then secondarily for HCD review. So, we believe that the listing of sites as represented and the units as identified really is appropriate for including and incorporating into the draft housing element, and then letting that document go through the public review process, planning commission consideration, council consideration, and then ultimately following a nod of acceptance from the commission and council, review and ultimately approval by HCD. So we certainly would like to open it up for the committee to discuss, but this is what we've come up with, and we think it's a very reasonable approach, considering obviously the very challenging and arduous process of trying to identify 1,243 units within our community. And with that, I'll leave it open for any comments you may have. Again, also, we've got John Douglas, our consultant, online. I'd also like to note that Barry, as you all know, is serving as a contract planner, helping us out while the senior planner position is vacant. And he's also been working very heavily on this with me, as has Marco, our assistant planner. So with that, I'll leave it open for the committee members, and any thoughts, questions you may have. We're here to field those and work with you.
I have a comment on, you got 30 units. Isn't Main Street's already 2 stories high? And the second story is either a business or a residential unit. So how are you getting any more units on Main Street, which I personally think should be left alone? But how will you get 30 more units when it's already double decked?
Actually, a good portion. There are a number of properties on Main Street that they may look like they're two-story. They're not. Um, there's also the potential that some of those second-story office buildings or office spaces could be converted to residential as well, and that would be counted if there was that conversion occurring. But there are actually a number of properties along the Main Street, the 3-block Main Street corridor, that are single-story today, that possibly could be redeveloped, reconstructed as as two-story units going forward.
My next question, you've identified 1,577 units. We're required to come up with 1,243, which is a cushion of 334. How are you going to adjust that list for those 334?
As I just mentioned, going into the process of drafting a housing element, the public review process, and ultimately the HCD review process, we anticipate that this number will likely drop, but around a 20% cushion is actually, for this stage in the exercise, is actually a solid position to be in. So we are anticipating that this number will come down, but we're not recommending that it come down and match up with 1243 at this time, but that this be incorporated into the draft document, and through the public process and HCD review process, there would be the potential for that number to be adjusted.
Les, this is John. Could I jump in for just a second?
Absolutely, John.
Yeah. One of the thoughts that I wanted to make note of is that what we're working on with the housing element is a conceptual level, a high level document. It's not detailed approval of any development project that would happen in the future, if at all. And so I just wanted to reiterate how the process will play out and what we're going to end up with and what the process is going to look like over the next couple of years. So the first step, it's really a two-part process, a two-step process. The first step is preparing and adopting a housing element that identifies enough potential properties where housing could occur that could potentially satisfy that RHNA number. And that's at a high level, a policy level. And the housing element is not going to change any zoning on any property that's on this list. It's simply identifying properties where future development might occur if the zoning is amended. So that's the first step of the process. The second step of the process, and cities have up to 3 years to do this second step of the process, that's the actual zoning changes that would implement the housing element. So, through this, the discussion over the last hour, we've all seen that there's a lot of details that would remain to be worked out for most all of these sites. And those details would get worked out during the second stage of the process, the actual zoning amendments. And so when Les mentions having a cushion, that's important because what we will end up with in the housing element that's ultimately adopted by the city council is going to be a list of parcels that, if they are rezoned, could accommodate the amount of housing that's been assigned through the RHNA process. And then through that second step where the actual rezonings happen, additional details might come out where we all find out that maybe the estimated level of development that we have at this point is just not feasible for one reason or another. It could be aircraft crash hazard zones or noise areas or a whole variety of things that get sorted out in the detailed planning that goes into a zone change. And so I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of this two-step process And we're working on the first step of the process right now, where we're just identifying candidate sites. And I would encourage the committee not to reject any of these sites unless we all recognize that this is not a desirable situation that the city's in. You know, the city is doing this sort of with a gun to its head by the state, and so we all recognize that Seal Beach does not want to be doing this process right now, and we wouldn't be doing it probably but for the housing element. So what I would encourage though is not to delete any of these properties at this stage unless you feel strongly that it is just absolutely infeasible for one reason or another. And I understand when I say absolutely infeasible, I don't mean that you prefer that it not happen. I mean, there is some absolute deal breaker reason that no way, no how could the site be developed for housing. So I just wanted to throw that out so that we have some clear understanding of the context that we're doing this in.
Thank you, John.
How long is this list? How long does it last for?
Well, the housing element update process we're going through is an 8-year cycle. So assuming that we are able to complete it timely and it's approved by HCD, it's an 8-year window, Mike. So it would be in effect for the following 8 years.
And then in 8 years, there's nothing that prevents them from increasing that number even more like it was the last 8 years, I presume.
Yeah, the challenge is that we just don't know in 8 years what the state's going to require of us. You obviously get credit towards whatever's built of that 1,243 units during the 8-year window. So for example, let's say over the next 8 years, there's, 450 units built, then that would obviously come off of that 1,243, but there's, the remaining amount carries forward, and then it just matters. It's a matter of what the state identifies during the next cycle, what that reallocation is going to be for that next 8-year window after that. And that's assuming there's no changes to the current state law that's in effect as well.
I mean, we're basically almost maxing out what we can on almost every property feasible in the city. So I don't see how we're going to, how we going to be able to do more. And unfortunately, with the mixed use, you end up putting in more units than you're getting credit for. And
I absolutely agree with your points there. It's very challenging, and as you know, we're facing this. There are a number of cities that are in a similar situation like us that are close to being built out, and it's really forcing a much higher density and intensity of residential land use than was envisioned in the city for probably forever, but certainly not envisioned in our general plans right now. And it's extremely challenging. And I don't know where else you go after if these 1,243 units. I don't know where else we're gonna go after that. We're looking, no stones being unturned. We're looking everywhere we can to try and to be as creative and innovative as we can here.
Well, thank you for everything that you've put together. I think I tend to agree, like just go with what we have. The good thing is most of these will never be developed, like at least not in the next 10 years. Why would you tear down Coles and Burlington to build units there? Why, parking's already an issue, so.
Hi, how are you, sir?
Thank you, Steve. And I don't disagree. I mean, I think that many of these properties are likely not to develop. And I just, for a multitude of reasons.
Well, go ahead. I still don't believe that we should be putting residential under a runway path. Whatever the current is, it's a joint forces training base with multiple tenants training, and we don't know what the future uses would be. I would not like to do anything that would put that base at risk. I'd prefer to, as Councilman or Mayor Pro Tem had suggested, maybe trying to add a little bit more housing to Sunset Aquatic Park. Unfortunately, with the retail spots, if you have to add twice as much as you get credit for, so it's a hard pick to find a place that you can add to.
Thank you for that. We will definitely revisit Sunset Aquatic Park. I guess my recommendation at this point would be to leave, Old Ranch Country Club on there, at least from the standpoint of drafting the document. Obviously, it's going to go through that public review process with the commission and council, and there could be consideration given. I shouldn't say reconsider, but consideration given to possibly taking it off at that time, and again, there are a few properties on here we don't know for certain if they'll remain too. As I mentioned earlier, we need to reach out to Leisure World. We're still waiting to hear back from Boeing. Though we can still move forward we don't have to have their approval and endorsement to move forward, but obviously that's our focus, is to try to obtain that. There's nothing wrong with us being able to add a few more units if we can find them at Sunset Aquatic Park. That might make it a little easier as we go through the process, with some adjustments being made elsewhere on some of the other sites listed, if we're able to gain a few off of Sunset Aquatic Park.
I would concur with Steve and just move forward with the list and look for some more at Sunset Aquatic. If you can add that, be great. That'd be I'm okay with the list. Thank you.
When you submit your final to the state, are you going to submit 1,577 or 1,243?
We would, again, once it's gone through Planning Commission and City Council review, we would take that number that's approved by the City Council and then take that forward for HCD. It could be 1577 or something different, but again, we want to have a cushion there when it goes up to HCD for their review and approval. We anticipate that the state's likely going to lower that number a little bit, and we're going to end up at the end of the day right at that 1243 number.
I wouldn't give
So it's a factor of safety of 20%, basically.
Correct. And even if it goes up to the state for review, that doesn't mean that we can't make some modifications. Let's say it comes back favorably. There's nothing that then precludes us from obviously making some adjustments to drop it down. I mean, our interest is to try and obviously hit that 1243 mark, but we're as a team, as a staff team here and consultant team, we're a little concerned if we just took it up with 1243 listed to HCD, because we do anticipate, I've seen this, we've all seen it in the past. HCD rarely accepts the number that's there. They are notorious for coming back with some modifications and adjustments that they'd like to see made. And we're anticipating that here.
What are those asterisks under potential units again?
So that we have an estimated, each of those sites are the mixed use
Oh,
sites
okay.
that we've identified, and we're estimating a 50% reduction because that's typically, not typically, but that on average is what we've seen come back from HCD for mixed use projects.
See the final, or is that something that the city council will decide?
This would be something that's ultimately decided upon by city council. What we will do is take this forward, you know, incorporate this information into the draft housing element document. That document will then go to the planning commission and subsequent to city council. And once city council has given the initial approval of the document in its draft form, we'll send it up. We will then send it to HCD for their review. Once HCD has acknowledged it and given the review comments back, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, it comes back to us. There's a final document prepared. Then council would ultimately approve that final document. And that final document would then be ultimately certified by HCD.
You know, I'd like one other comment about Old Ranch Country Club. Besides the issue of the runway, is the issue of traffic. Lamson Avenue is a bottleneck at Lamson and Seal Beach Boulevard. And what's so frustrating for us, those of us who live over here in College Park East, is Lamson Avenue is the only way out. You don't have multiple ways. Lamson is it. So if you overload Lamson, it's just going to be awful. You know, when we were looking at some of the issues years ago, we were looking at level of service, and I know that I think they're changing that particular metric. But at the time, we were dealing with level of service F, and that's why we ended up with 3 lanes going into Seal Beach Boulevard. Once you hit the light before that light, the light going into the center there on Lamson on the south. They tried all sorts of things because it was just a mess. Like I said, in an emergency, if we don't have access to Lamson, we're done. There's no other way out for us. So to me, Old Ranch Country Club is a fatal flaw. You've got the runway and you've got Lamson Avenue. There's no other way out. There's no other way out. You have to go down to Manly to where in Garden Grove, to where it starts to branch off into other streets. But when we had the flooding back in, I think it was, I want to say 95 or 96. Barry, you would know when we had that flooding. It was somewhere, I think it was around 95, 96. Nobody could get out of College Park East. We were sealed. Nobody could get out. The PD was at Lamson and Seal Beach Boulevard. They weren't letting anybody in, and nobody could get out because we were flooded. I mean, it was awful. And you couldn't even get past Manly because that was flooded. So I'm just saying, we have a real problem here with, you know, quote, the circulation. And I am not in favor of anything that's going to gum that up. So Barry, add that to your list.
Okay, I just wanted to show a couple real quick things and then we'll conclude. Again, this is the visual representation of all of the different locations we've identified to you this afternoon. So it kind of shows the disbursement of them as well as just a generalized size of the circles represent kind of the basically the estimated unit count for the different locations. So as you can see there, throughout the community. And then again, we've been going through the committee's questions and discussing the sites. You've definitely been giving us a direction this evening, and we're hearing you loud and clear, and we'll be moving forward accordingly. And as we've identified previously, the next steps include John coming up with a draft housing element document. And then once that document's ready for review, we will make it available for public review. And we will subsequently schedule Planning Commission and City Council consideration of the document. And then again, once there is approval of that draft document granted, it will be forwarded up to Housing Community Development for their review and comments. That will then come back to us, and adjustments will be made, and that will be brought forward again for final review by Planning Commission and City Council, and final adoption by City Council at that time. So we have a schedule that puts us in a position to be able to complete this right around the deadline, which is, we're a little behind, but we're hoping to be able to make up some time and meet that mid-October deadline. But we're definitely on our way and be able to show progress to the state, most importantly, in trying to meet these requirements and meet the deadline to have a certified housing element in a timely fashion. So with that really concludes everything that we wanted to bring up for you this evening. Again, I think it's been very clear on our end, the comments that we received and the position on the inventory list. We're ready to take that information forward again and create the draft document. And again, unless there's a clear fatal flaw site, which I don't think we've heard, we definitely have heard the concerns with a few of the sites, but we have not heard any fatal flaw comments. So we're ready to move forward with the list as is. And again, unless there's any final comments from committee members, we'll move forward accordingly.
Thank you for all your hard work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Les, and everybody else.
Yes, thank you.
Right. Thank you all. We really appreciate your time and effort in consideration. And again, we'll keep both the commission and council apprised of our schedule as we venture forward with this. And again, thank you very much.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
All right.